Okay. I hit the button, but I don't see that it says start recording. There we go.
Okay. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And we will start by taking the roll, starting with members of the committee. So I will start. Chelsea Meaningham, present. We'll go to Joel.
Joel Moore, present. Suzanne.
Oh, we can't hear you, Suzanne. You're muted.
Oh, Suzanne, you're muted.
Suzanne Dirksen. There we go.
Stephen Lord.
Wonderful. Members of council.
Rita Russell, council member at large.
And city staff.
Jenny Nolan, budget administrator. And Maria.
Maria DeAndre, Director of Public Works.
Perfect.
And all right.
And I think Tim is on the call.
Yeah, Tim Dodd, Interim Finance Director.
Okay.
And guest, future member Joshua Newell. Okay, we will go ahead and move to approve the minutes from our last meeting, which was December 15th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
I'll move for second.
Love it. Any opposed? Looks like we're good. Minutes are approved. Wonderful. With the housekeeping out of the way, we will move on to our new business. And we are looking forward to a presentation this evening from the Public Works Department, Maria DeAndre. And with that, I will actually pass the floor to you to share with us a little bit about your budget for the year and some of the questions that we asked.
Great. Wonderful. I'm going to share my screen here and go through the presentation. Let's see. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, oops. So again, for those who don't know me, I'm Maria DeAndre. I'm the Director of Public Works. Been with the City of Englewood just about 2.5 years now, and have worked in the Denver metro area at a couple of different cities, as well as Jefferson County. So I've spent pretty much my entire career as a civil engineer in local government. So I've been, previous to that, I was was raised in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and worked for 2 suburbs of Minneapolis as their city engineer prior to coming out to Colorado. So tonight we're going to give a little bit of an overview of what the Public Works Department does. So we have a variety of divisions, and we serve both external customers, the public, the traveling public, as well as internal customers through our facilities and fleet divisions. So feel free to interrupt me with questions, just raise your hand, and we'll go from there. So our mission is really about quality. So overall, the city's mission is to ensure high quality of life, economic vitality, and a uniquely desirable community identity. And where Public Works comes in is through delivery of quality projects, programs, and services. So again, we're building things, we're maintaining pretty much everything within the right of way, and making sure that that's done, again, to high quality, on budget or under budget, and within the timeframes that are established. Our particular values for the Public Works Department are accountability for ourselves and our actions, quality again, efficiency, and respect for everyone. And really that underlying theme is building a high performance team. So even though we do a variety of different tasks, we try and integrate and break down those silos between departments or divisions so that we're working efficiently together. And just a little bit of an overview here of our structure. So we have kind of 4 large areas that we focus on: engineering and capital projects delivery, So we review and permit everything that goes on in the right of way. So for example, if somebody's development is putting in a new water line or a home has to do a sewer repair, we're permitting that through the Public Works Department, inspecting it and making sure that our infrastructure hasn't been damaged and that it's safe for the traveling public. We do development review for new developments as they come in, and then this division handles all of the major capital projects that we do. So right now we're working on the interchange of Broadway and 285 or Hampton to redesign that and rebuild it. That's a major project. We're designing a project over for a pedestrian bridge over Oxford at just west of Windermere to the Oxford Light Rail Station. Those are some major things that we're doing right now, as well as our annual pavement management program. So we go out, and I'll show you a slide of that later on, but we're doing annual pavement maintenance work throughout the year, focused in different zones of the city, as well as repairing our sidewalks. Traffic engineering falls under here, so we work closely with police to address neighborhood traffic calming issues, when there's issues with signage or striping, and then we maintain all of the signals as well. So then that gets into the operations and maintenance division. So we also maintain all of the fleet for the city. We have just over about 345 pieces of equipment and different vehicles. That includes the police department, which obviously has a significant role in providing patrol within the city. As well as the wastewater treatment plant, which has a number of vehicles dedicated to their facilities. Then facility maintenance. So we do all of the maintenance of city buildings, either through our own staff or contracting that out, and then do the custodial services for those buildings as well. That includes the rec center, the Malley Center, service center, the new police building, all of that. And then streets maintenance and operations. So this gets into plowing, pothole management, and patching, street sweeping, all of those operations that we're taking care of. Again, concrete curb replacement, and finally traffic operations, so our signals, crosswalks, and signage that we maintain everything again in the right of way. Stormwater is a relatively new area. So we've had, as you probably read and heard, we've experienced a significant storm event in the summer of 2018. And this division was transferred to Public Works from the Utilities Department back in 2018, just to make sure that there was more of a focus in terms of maintaining our stormwater system, taking care of it, making sure that we can ensure stormwater quality, and the runoff that we have for different developments as well as city properties, and then really working to develop new capital projects to address flooding within the city. So we're currently in the process of designing some very major stormwater programs or stormwater projects to address flooding in the south part of the city, and those are in the range of right now about $30 million. We also have responsibility for asset management within Public Works. So you can imagine all of these things, whether it's streetlights or curb and gutter or sidewalks, we want to know what we have and then make a plan for how we're going to address that and manage that proactively. So we have 64 traffic signals as an example that are within our responsibility. And so even if we replaced one of those a year, that would be a 64-year life cycle. And so instead, which are very costly. So they're typically in the range of $250,000 to probably $350,000 to replace a traffic signal. And how do we manage that? How do we go about identifying those funds and then prioritizing which of those traffic signals do we replace? Do we upgrade them? How do we make sure that they're working efficiently? All of that goes into asset management. And then finally, we're also responsible for the EAF area, also known as the Englewood Environmental Foundation. So we manage, basically that's about roughly 35 acres in and around the Civic Center that are owned by EAF, which is a subsidiary or nonprofit associated with the city. And so those lands and those grounds are maintained separately through various contracts. And so we oversee that.
Yep.
And that's all delivered through about 58 folks.
Director.
Yeah, on the subject of custodial,
Mhm.
what percentage of our custodial is contracted?
We have contracted this year for some of that work, but only because we've lost some staff due to COVID and you know, people leaving. So we've been
Okay.
down a little bit, and we had to bring a contract firm in to help us and kind of assist us with that. But otherwise, in the past, I would say none.
Okay, so like the rec center is 100% maintained by city staff.
Correct. Yep.
But since city center is owned by EAF, technically, that is contract custodial at work there, correct?
Not within the city center, but within the building, but the grounds basically. So snow plowing, landscaping in and around the city center is done by contract.
Okay, so even the day porters at city center are city staff.
They are, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Were there other questions? Okay. Oops. Can you still see my screen? Okay. So an overview of the divisions. I think I've touched on a lot of this already. Let's see, anything else here? Yeah, we're in the operations and maintenance division. Yeah, I touched on most of these. Within custodial, we're also, doing day porter services, so cleaning and just restocking supplies during the day, especially at the PD building where you can imagine they're 24/7. So we do have custodial staff working 7 days a week. We do all of the room setups and various kind of responding to special events as well. So just a few 2020 accomplishments. 2020 was very heavily focused on stormwater and our kind of bringing our stormwater program up to speed. So we updated our drainage criteria manual. We created a stormwater master plan, as well as a 5-year maintenance plan for how we're going to address the stormwater sewer system. We completed a stormwater fee study and increased the stormwater rates based on that stormwater fee. So that went into effect on January 1st for the new stormwater fees. And the plan per that stormwater fee study was that would occur over the next 3 years. So we did increase the fees in 2019, in 2020, and we'll do that again in the fall of 2021. And again, that's in support of those planned projects that we're going to be implementing here in both 2021 and 2022. Those initial stormwater projects that were identified through both the master plan as well as our flood prone study that we completed in 2019. We recently submitted a grant to FEMA for $14.5 million roughly to assist in those in that stormwater project. The major one, what we call S1 and S2, that goes basically from Rotolo Park out to the South Platte River to upgrade and add piping to provide another outlet for that storm drainage basin in the south portion of town. We also coordinated with the Mile High Flood District on some major drainage way planning, and we completed stormwater pipe cleaning, again using city staff. We completed about 80 to 85% of the entire system last year. In terms of capital projects, we completed the PD building, phase 2, which was essentially tearing down the old building and building the parking lot that is adjacent to the new building. We established or began the process for, again, reconstructing 285 and Broadway interchange by working with CDOT to get the intergovernmental agreement approved, as well as selecting a design consultant. That Oxford pedestrian bridge I mentioned, we kicked off design this year as well, or late last year. We've been working on alleys. You may have seen that in your area, where we're going through and grading those to create more of a V in the middle so that drainage runs away from private property to the V in the middle. And then we're spraying a dust suppressant material on all of those alleys. This is to address the concerns we've had over the last several years about the gravel alleys and just the overall poor condition of them. So there's been a lot of potholes which are contributed to by heavy traffic and or just the number of vehicles that are using an alley. And so we feel that this has gone a long way to creating, again, getting the drainage out of the alley and then creating a very stable surface to prevent some of those potholes from occurring. And it seems to be working well so far.
So I have a question about that program specifically, Maria.
Yeah.
With the amount of money and effort the city has been investing in the alleys, have we seen any reduction in complaints about conditions in alleys?
Huge reduction in complaints. So yeah, I when I started, I think we were doing grading of alleys on a request basis, but really nothing in a proactive manner and nothing to address, again, those drainage issues. So we'd go in and use our grader to flatten out the alley. But again, that didn't help it made it smooth, but it didn't get the water off of the alley. So I think that's where the benefit of this V comes in, is to make a way, channel it to get out to either end of the alley and just get it off the surface. So I think that's what's making a big difference. But our complaints have gone down almost to, a handful really that we're dealing with at any given time.
So I have a question somewhat secondary to that. And this may come across as a criticism, and that's not how it's intended. Are we sacrificing regular street conditions in order to maintain alleys? So are we leaving things like street cuts longer and other things along those lines?
I would say yes. So in the past, I think we've neglected alleys in lieu of doing more work on the streets and let the alleys go. And I think we're trying to find a better balance, but we are spending more resources on alleys, which is then causing or resulting in less, effort on the streets. I would agree with that. So the result is then, longer times before we pave or patch utility cuts or repair potholes or seal cracks, that sort of thing.
So it sounds like there might be a little opportunity there to see if we can figure out a balance or perhaps provide some more resources to Public Works so that we don't have to choose.
Yes. And I'll talk about that, a little bit later. So we were able to replace or install 143 ped ramps. So these were corners where maybe there was no pedestrian ramp at all. And that's where the corner drops down so it becomes accessible for a wheelchair. Bikes use those a lot. So we had 79 locations where there was no pedestrian ramp. And so we were able to install those. And then the other ones, let's see, be 64, were locations where the ped ramp did exist, but it didn't meet current ADA guidelines. So per the standards, federal standards for ADA, we need to continually upgrade those, make sure we're making progress to improve those throughout the city. So I think that was a huge number that we were able to do this past year. We also eliminated quite a few trip hazards. We focused our area in the southwest portion of town, and we installed the bike lanes on Oxford Avenue, which you probably have saw too.
So another question, sorry.
That's right.
The trip hazard production. As someone who walks a lot through Inglewood, first of all, let me say that I really appreciate this greatly. I've seen the benefit. You said the note here says completed. Is that also an ongoing project, or was that a pilot, or? I should clarify that. So we completed it in zone. I'll just jump ahead here so you know what I'm referring to. So we work in these zones. So last year we were in zone 2, which is again kind of the southwest portion of town. So we were working not only here, as you can see, doing corrective work, which is typically our mill and overlay, but then we also focus our concrete work in this same zone as where we're doing the corrective. So we were in here, when I say completed, we were able to eliminate all trip hazards in zone 2 that were greater than a 1/2 inch.
and either through grinding those down to make them level with the adjacent concrete, or in certain cases, like if it's too cracked or whatever, we actually replaced the concrete, removed it, and installed new concrete to make that level.
And this is a 4 or 5 year cycle?
Yep, this is a 5-year cycle.
So if your trip hazard was less than a half an inch,
Mm-hmm.
the odds are good that sometime within the next 5 years, it may be a half inch or more. Is there an option to phone in repairs like that, or is it just done in the 5-year cycle?
No, there is. So this year you can see we'll be working in zone 3 for both corrective and trip hazards. So we're already out and we're almost done compiling that list of trip hazards within zone 3. But we're always willing and want to address, let's say somebody calls from zone 1, and says, hey, can you come out and look at my sidewalk? We will add those in if they meet those criteria. And so the contractor will focus in zone 3, let's say this year, but he'll go off and do some of these one-offs as needed, because we still want to address those, because otherwise, as you see from the table here, we won't be back to zone 1 until 2024. And we don't want to leave that trip hazard for another 3 years.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Director DeAndrea,
Mm-hmm.
can I ask you a question? So
Sure.
on that 14.4 million, if we actually get the grant, will that cut the amount that we will have to put out for bond?
Not this initial bond that we're talking about, the 10 million, but subsequent, yes, definitely.
So the 30 million, if we get it, it would cut the 30 million almost in half?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would be, game changing, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple more things here. We created a snow and ice policy. We never had one in the city before. And that's just more communication with the public about what we do, how we address snow and ice, as well as just being more transparent with our priorities and which streets we do first, and what type of events. So snow like we got today, we're going to have a different response than we might if we have like 6 inches and growing in the city. So we have different responses based on that level of snow depth and significance. We did a variety of projects, construction projects. These are building types of construction projects within the Civic Center, as well as Rec Center and Malley, to address some of the issues just with building people separation, making things more safe in terms of COVID response. And we used CARES funding to accomplish that. So we did, replaced carpet over at the Malley and the rec centers with more of a VCT tile. So it's easier to clean, and then therefore less subject to COVID or carrying the virus, if you will. We also did work over at the golf course related to that. Talked a little already about ADA and the pavement maintenance. We also modified, if you hadn't heard about this, we upgraded our model traffic code, which is based on the state's traffic code, to the current version from 2020, and also made some modifications that were unique to Englewood in that. One of those was that we're citywide, all streets are now 25 miles per hour is the speed limit. It was previously 30. So we're going to be we're working currently with communications to kind of communicate that out to the public. That doesn't mean that every street will be signed as 25. It's just those, and Broadway, for example, or the busier streets will still be what they're posted, but a residential street that was previously 30 miles per hour is now 25. And that was a response to address neighborhood traffic calming, to just get people to try and slow down and hopefully make streets safer as a result. If you've been in the downtown area, you've seen the 2 artistic crosswalks that we installed, one near El Tepehuan, and then one up a block north and on the east side that had a lot of colors to it, blues and purples. This is something we researched quite heavily, and I think it's been well received in the downtown area. We also worked with MOA, or the outdoor arts museum on these artist wraps on our traffic control boxes. And again, those are primarily along Broadway, and you'll see them if you drive along there. So trying to incorporate art in different ways within the right of way. And finally, we've been working on the organized garbage and recycling collection. So we were able to solicit proposals for that. We developed a citizens committee, which is currently working and working to basically modify our previous request for proposals and go out with a new one here within the next few months. So I know that was a lot. Then some kind of just building on that. Again, we kind of focus on projects, programs, and studies. We will be rebidding out the Dartmouth Bridge Widening Project. This is on the west side of Santa Fe at Dartmouth, kind of in the north end of town. We're going to be widening out that bridge as well as the segment of street between US 85 and Dartmouth. So that if you're familiar with that area, if you're going westbound, the left lane becomes a left only lane, and we're going to actually be able to have 2 lanes going forward, so you don't have to have that merge as you go west. And it will widen the bridge to allow for a sidewalk and replace the bridge deck, which is in poor condition. We are going to be starting construction of our stormwater capital projects in the south portion of town, as well as we'll be completing the design of that pedestrian bridge. That will probably be constructed early next year. And most likely what it will entail is where we build the bridge off-site and then drop it in with a crane. So that'll be fun. Let's see here. Then we're going to be doing some parking lot repairs out at the service center. Our annual pavement maintenance zones. So I'll just move ahead there. So zone 3 and zone 4. So you can see here, so we focus, zone 3 will be mill and overlay, where we're actually removing the surface of the pavement on certain streets. We're still identifying those locations and then replacing them with new asphalt. And then in zone 4, which is our preventative, this is where we'll focus on streets where we'll actually seal the cracks and then put what's called a slurry seal on them to extend their life. So we're identifying streets in this zone that are still in good condition, and we want to invest a little bit of money to keep them that way, as opposed to the corrective where we have to do more work and basically more costs in order to bring them back up to a serviceable condition. So not every street, as it says here, not every street in these zones will be touched. Instead, we're looking at data on those to identify which streets are appropriate to do this year in that cycle. Let's see here. So we're hoping that we can, again, do stormwater or storm sewer system cleaning and televising. So what we didn't do this year, or what we're going to add in, is actually televising the lines to see what condition they're in. So we did go through and clean everything and make sure that it was clear of all debris. Now we want to go back and actually videotape the line using a special camera that you can pull through the line to see what condition there are, what they're in, if there's any gaps that might need to be repaired, if the bottom of the pipe is still in good condition, and then identify those repairs for a future project. We'll also be replacing a significant number of our vehicles and equipment to stay up to speed and make sure that we have good vehicles for employees to use. We'll hopefully be completing our garbage and recycling effort in the sense that we'll be bringing those recommendations from the committee back to City Council for further direction and to hopefully make a decision. We're also going to be developing a neighborhood traffic calming program. Excuse me, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. On the recycling and the garbage effort, I know this is not traditional, but has there been any discussion about including multi-unit buildings in that conversation?
We haven't at this point, but that is on the agenda to talk about. So at the beginning of this process, we identified single family units, duplexes, and triplexes because they would normally use the type of bins that we will. Beyond that, where let's say apartment buildings or units that are more than that will typically have like more of a dumpster. And so that takes different equipment than what you would need to service at your home. That was the discerning factor, but that is on the committee's list because that has come up. I believe we'll be talking about that over the next couple of meetings to say, should we expand this to allow for collection by apartment buildings?
Thank you.
Mhm.
I just would like to add something there.
Chair
I sit on that committee and I've been chairing it. And one of the factors that compelled me that maybe apartments and other units are secondary is we have a sizable number of single-family residences in Inglewood. Maria, you probably know that number better than I do, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 9,000 single-family residents.
9,600 units, I think we're looking at. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so even with just that number, a contract would have a significant effect citywide.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we are planning to go out to issue bonds for the stormwater program to fund those initial efforts. That would be a $10 million bond issuance, and that'll be coming before council here in late February and March. So the bonds will probably be issued towards the end of March, so that we can access that funding sometime in April. We will also be completing a signage inventory for our asset management plan to create that, how we go about replacing all the regulatory signs within the city and the street name signs that you see at the corners. We're currently rating all of the streets, doing an inventory of those and completing a rating of 0 to 100 on all the pavements. And then we'll be looking at facilities in terms of ADA compliance, and do we need to do anything else in terms of projects to make sure that they are in accordance with the ADA standards. 2021 budget requests. So we did request 2 traffic operations technicians. That was as a result, again, I mentioned we have 64 signals that we maintain. And we're just finding that those are requiring more and more maintenance by our technicians, but we're also being asked to do other things. So they are replacing crosswalks that have failed or worn off. And so we're repainting those at a greater rate, as well as putting up banners, putting up different signs throughout the city, just more requests in general. We also have taken over underground marking for all of our fiber optics that are managed by IT, just because we have the equipment to do that. We also locate anything as far as signal wiring or conduit that we have as far as for the signals that is underground, and that's taking more effort as well. While there was certainly an understanding of that those positions were needed, they were not funded because there were other needs within the city. We were conscious of budget cuts or less revenue as a result of COVID. And so that's why those 2 positions were not funded. However, additional resources of, I believe it was $65,000 was put in the budget for 2021 to help offset some of that work that we know needs to be done in terms of addressing the traffic signal and some of the other needs that are still outstanding for traffic. We had also talked about with council potentially putting in some, anticipating that we might have had a decision early this year in 2021. We were talking about putting in some resources for organized trash collection, but then decided that, well, if that happens in 2021 or there's a need for those resources, that we would do a budget supplemental. And so really we at the request of staff, this was delayed from a discussion of or inclusion in the 2021 budget. And as far as, so getting to the questions that were want to be addressed in this presentation, I think our continued efforts and focus will be on asset management going forward. And it's really looking for the resources for that inventory collection. So as an example with the stormwater, you know, we have to have staff who can measure or get the elevations of the invert, which is the bottom of the pipe, the top of the pipe, the size of the pipe, all of those pieces, we need to collect that. And so if you imagine that for all of our resources, whether that be pavement, alleys, street signs, all those ones that we want to work on this year, there's a lot of data that needs to be collected and put in a format electronically that then can be downloaded and managed efficiently. So that's really a need for us right now, is just getting the money and the resources, whether we do that with staff or through contracts. That's a significant effort that we need to focus on.
Can we pause there for 1 second?
Yeah.
I remember either last year or the year before, the city was talking about centralizing GIS operations. Is that occurring now? This sounds like something that would be a GIS type task.
The GIS is located within IT, and I think they're more responsible, I would say, for the mapping and the data organization. What we're doing as far as asset management, I think each department is responsible then for collecting their own data and managing it to prioritize and plan for that work going forward. So GIS wasn't going to do that for us, but they are responsible for managing the data.
So I just want to make sure I understand this completely. Because it sounds like it's still not fully centralized.
It is not.
Okay.
I don't know if that was the intent. That's not where we're going. So we were able in the 2020 budget to hire an asset manager for public works. Utilities will be, the wastewater treatment plant also hired an asset management person in 2020. And I know utilities will be asking for that in 2021 or for 2022. So I think if that was the intent, it's more now been decentralized to deal with the individual assets while GIS still maintains control of the data.
Okay. Okay.
But I don't think they necessarily have the subject matter expertise, to help us with how do you prioritize this particular street for maintenance over this one. And that's where that asset manager helps plan.
Thanks.
Was there another question? Okay. One other effort that's come more forward is walkability. And so we're currently in the process of identifying those missing gaps in the sidewalk infrastructure. So this might be, for whatever reason, a sidewalk didn't get built. Typically, it might be because there's a hill behind there, or there's something else going on with the landscaping that caused that to be more of a constructability issue. So we're trying to create a map of all of those and then start to prioritize those for potentially to build those. Also, potentially widening existing sidewalks. So Steve, you mentioned that you walk around quite a bit. I think even through COVID, more people are out just within their neighborhood and walking. And so is there a desire to maybe widen out those sidewalks so two people can walk abreast? Many of our walks are probably 42 inches or less, so less than 4 feet wide, especially the ones that are adjacent to the curb. It can feel quite narrow. And if you're walking two abreast and you meet somebody coming the other way, typically one or the other party has to step into the street or up into somebody's yard in order to let somebody pass. While we certainly can't widen sidewalks to, let's say, 8 feet, is there a desire to maybe make them a little bit wider so that they're more comfortable, they're safer, and encourage people to get out and walk more often? And then I've already talked about, but just continuing that funding so that we can upgrade and install pedestrian ramps throughout the city. I think we've been making some good progress over the last several years, and want to make sure we continue that. That has been an area where other cities, particularly Denver, I believe Colorado Springs as well, have encountered lawsuits from either disabled people or others who cannot fully and actively use the system. And what we're required as a community to do, any community, is required to show good progress. So when we talk about the 143 ped ramps, I think that's great progress. And proving that while we can't, correct every situation in 1 year, we are making strides to make sure that our system is more and more compatible and accessible. And finally, pavement management, which we'll talk just a little bit more about that again. While our funding currently for 2021 and has been for the last couple of years is in that $1.6 to $1.8 million per year, we have, which is great. But if you imagine that we have, well, I know we have about 121 lane or center line miles of streets. We're still not, even at the 1.8 million, we're not getting to the point where we're investing enough to keep up with the needs of the system. So really that ends up being almost a 50 to 60 year cycle at the 1.8 million to try and keep up with either the preventative or the corrective maintenance. So we want to not just talk about, increasing the funding, but really show the needs of that program and how we're doing this in a thoughtful manner. Part of that is coordinating with private and city utilities. So what we don't want to have happen is Xcel Energy to come in and tear up a new street and make potholes, and what we need then is better coordination if that happens. Also with city utilities, there's going to be more of an emphasis in the future replacing water mains, replacing sanitary sewer lines, and we want to make sure that those dovetail with our projects. So again, they're not coming in a year or two behind us and tearing up a new road where we've invested a significant amount of city funds. I'll just pause there for a minute. Is there any questions so far?
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
On the subject of those sort of right-of-way utilities type things, what is or is not within our control? So for instance, if Xcel decides that they need to replace gas mains or there's a break somewhere, obviously we can't tell them that they can't dig up the road to fix a gas main break. That's a safety issue.
Yeah.
So where does our control begin and end on that?
Honestly, it's pretty limited. So especially to your point, an example like that, where it's an emergency or a safety issue, they have the rights to go in and tear up the road and make that repair. We do have a 2-year moratorium on newly paved streets. So things that are routine, if Xcel came in and said, hey, we want to do this project, it's not an emergency, we just want to upgrade everybody's gas service on a particular year, that's not an emergency, and we would require them to wait 2 years before they could tear up the street. And that's why we want to be having those meetings with Xcel to see if they can, move some things around to better align with our planned schedule. But that requires us to know in advance what those streets are so that they have time to coordinate their plans. And I think that's the piece where we want to get out and know not just, the upcoming for 2021, but we can tell them for the next couple of years, here's our planned streets. And they're going to be much more open to working with us if they've got some time to make their own modifications to their schedule.
So the second question was is just kind of random on the subject of widening sidewalks. I've always wondered, in front of my house, I have the sidewalk, and then I have this little strip that grows weeds, and then I have the curb. And was there, as an engineer, was there an intent behind installing that little strip, or was it just cheaper not to put concrete in?
I think it was based on a variety of things. So I think safety, so having that buffer between the street and the sidewalk, so you would feel comfortable. A lot of times, I call that area the boulevard, and those are typically where you might plant trees. And so again, kind of creating that buffer between the street area and the sidewalk and the private home area, and having an area where the car doors swing open and where snow gets deposited. I know in the Midwest, boulevards are quite popular because of the need to have snow placed there. So that's a couple of reasons. But then you see a lot of areas around town too, where the sidewalk is adjacent to the curb, and that seems to be quite popular in the Denver metro area as well.
Thank you.
Okay. So I've talked a little bit about this. I can certainly go into more detail if you like on the pavement management work. This will be our 3rd year of pavement management. And so I think, what used to happen was we would pick streets kind of randomly throughout the city, and therefore there'd be a lot of communication and a lot of and construction in a lot of different areas. This helps us focus all our work in one particular area and for any type of work. And I think it's been well received by residents and the traveling public as well. So
I
if we
just have
were
one quick piece of feedback on that.
Sure.
I too like it. I did get a little frustrated last year at the conditions on Broadway. And I mean, some days felt to me like I was driving a moonscape. So there are obviously parts of the city that don't lend themselves well to this model. And I would suggest that a main thoroughfare like Broadway that sees, 75,000 cars a day or something like that might want more frequent attention.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So I would say this program is focused primarily on the residential streets, the lower volume. We do have to address the bigger streets like pavement management, or excuse me, like Broadway, like Dartmouth, in a different manner.
Good, thank you.
All right, and so question, if we were to increase in our budget, I think one of the things for us would be additional staff resources. We get, as you can imagine, there's a lot of ideas, there's new initiatives coming up, like the organized garbage collection as an example of like a current one. There's so many things in terms of sustainability that we could be working on that I could see us putting some effort in, either probably through staff, to work on those types of things that come up from the community, that we can be responsive, we can explore new ideas, and hopefully then implement them. And finally, grant writing. So there are grants out there. And I think those, if we were to put in more effort to submit for grants, I think we could recoup those investments of staff time through those grants that we were able to receive. And then finally, asset managed data collection. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but making sure just collecting all of that data, as you can imagine, for any of those assets takes an enormous amount of time and resources. And so being able to put some additional funding towards that would certainly be of interest and I think benefit for the community. And I think that's it. So happy to answer any questions or talk more in depth about anything we do in Public Works.
I've got 2 questions about the organized garbage collection.
Okay.
I did want to wait till the very end before I brought these up. So as I understand it, as of today, the thought is that this work would require 2 FTE to manage the contracts and operations. Is that correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So we're still looking, actually we're looking at 3 positions.
Oh.
So 2.5.
Well,
so 1 person to manage it, like a manager of the program, potentially, and then 1 administrative person to assist with the billing and phone calls. And then potentially what we're looking at is additional support for the code enforcement department, because more than likely, as you can imagine, the bins are wrong, or they're out in the, they need to be put into your garage by a certain date, or they have to be out here, or people are dumping things illegally, whatever. So we're still examining that, but that's what we're looking at in terms of staffing right now.
Thanks. And I guess this is a question for you and or Steve. As I listen to the meetings and read comments on Nextdoor, there still seems to be a lot of misinformation discussed among community members. And the opposition seems to be based on misinformation or just lack of education. So what is the committee or the city planning to do to effectively communicate and educate to residents and voters?
Yeah, so I'll let Steve jump in as well. So the plan, there has been, I would agree with you, there has been a lot of misinformation, and we're actually working on that right now to try and address that. There is no plan, or there is no proposals on the table right now. The committee is working on redrafting the RFP for organized collection services. So the request for proposal would likely go out within the next few months. We would solicit proposals back from haulers that would include costs. So then the plan would be is we'd evaluate those. Council or the committee would make a recommendation to city council, but then we would go through a community outreach process to inform this community about what the rates are, what the parameters of the program might be. One of the items we're considering is an opt-out. So maybe you don't participate, or there's a way where you don't have to participate in the program. Again, we're debating all those things, but we would do a rollout of all of those elements to seek public input before council would make that final decision.
Thank you.
I had a question about your 2021 budget request. You note that you requested 2 traffic operations technicians and they weren't funded. We understand the state of the economy with COVID. But how many do you have currently? You were seeking 2 additional into what?
We have 3 right now.
Okay.
And 1 supervisor.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Steve, did you want to add anything on about the citizens committee or the communication process?
You know, I don't have a whole lot to add, just that I have recently engaged staff in regards to the city's messaging in particular. And I had some concerns, and I think those concerns have been adequately addressed. So you may see some more things rolling out in the near future. So, and every session we go over the current status before we take public comment. That's been our new tradition. We had one meeting where we took 60 minutes of public comment, essentially all of which was people complaining about something that isn't on the table, isn't happening. So that was a bit demoralizing. My perspective on the subject is that there's no harm in discussing, and that's what the committee's doing right now. We're discussing a possibility. Nothing's been adopted, nothing's been decided, and I for one am willing to contribute to that process. I think that I provide a somewhat unique perspective on a number of things, this being one of them, and so I want to be a part of whatever decision gets made.
Thanks. And I admit I have not listened to last night's meeting yet, so I hope there is improvement with the nature of the public comments that you're receiving. Some of them I see, you know, there's issues that are raised that were easily addressed last summer when you had those trash and talk meetings. Keep up the good work.
But I think it's a point well taken that we can do a better job. How do we more proactively manage that message, you know, so that we don't have to work from, you know, overcoming the misinformation that might be out there, but instead put out some consistent messaging so that people do get or understand where we are in the process. I think it's a good way for us to improve.
And one more thing, I would like to give voice to the people who simply object to the idea of having the choice made for them. Mm-hmm. That is a personal stance. You know, and there's not going to be any, in my opinion, method of overcoming that. So, you know, I understand that perspective, and they will continue to come to the committee and tell us that they don't want that decision made for them. And the committee will continue to operate as long as council allows us, and continue to do our work, which is, as Maria indicated, trying to flesh out what a proposal would look like, and then just making a recommendation to council on that proposal.
There are no other questions. Thank you so much, Director DeAndre.
Thank you. Nice
and
to meet you.
Before you go, Maria, I just want to say, I don't tell this to every department head that meets with us, but I'm glad you're here. I know it's been not the easiest 2.5 years, but thanks for your service.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
All right, we will move forward in our agenda for a finance director search update from the interim finance director, Tim Dodd. You have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. So when I talked to Jenny about putting this on the agenda, I think it was mid-December, and we weren't sure where we would be with the search at the end of January. So I'm very happy to announce that the search has ended a while ago. My service as the interim director will end this Friday, and then our new full permanent director, Jackie Lowe, is going to start on Monday, February 1st. She will be introduced to council that evening. She will be going through her orientation, and then we will also be introducing her to the many facets of her job and her team that afternoon. So she comes to us. She went through a very extensive process. We used a company called GovHR to help us do the recruitment. I believe there were over 90 applicants. I believe, Suzanne, I think you were a part of the review process, so really appreciate that we had someone from this committee that was a part of it. Jackie has a background, obviously, in finance. She was the CFO of the YMCA of the region for about 9 years. She currently is the interim CFO for a nonprofit focused on healthcare that's based in Washington, D.C. She lives in Littleton. She's been in the Denver area for several years. She loves it here. She asks a lot of questions and is very engaged and is very excited to be here. A lot of her background in finance relates, she is a CPA, and she also has extensive experience in the budgeting processes. This will be her first government job, but she's a very quick learner, and obviously there are some similarities between the nonprofit and government sectors. Of course, there are differences as well. The budget area is something she's very interested in. I've met with her 3 times, and she has a lot of questions and a lot of ideas and Jenny and I have talked a bit about it. She knows about this committee. She knew I was meeting with all of you tonight, and she already has it on her calendar for the 4th Tuesday of February. So she's very excited to be a member of this group, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
I don't have a question, but I would like to add to that. Oh, were you raising your hand, Chelsea?
No, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Saw your hand go up out of the corner of my eye. So I just wanted to say thank you for including me in the interview process. If you could extend that to Manager Luz. It was just a good opportunity, and I think it was important to have a community perspective. And I think what struck me most about Jackie was her level of professionalism. There were 2 of the 4 candidates that we interviewed that I felt most comfortable with. Naturally, Jackie was one of them, so I'm excited to have her, and I think Steve and Chelsea and Joel, I think you guys will like her. And Josh. Josh, you'll like her too.
I'm curious, just what will the transition onboarding process be like? I know, there's a budget process and all of that. Will she be kind of up and running by the end of February, or will this be a slower process?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So when I transitioned into the interim role, Maria Sabata spent probably 5 weeks with me. I think we talked every day, usually 3 or 4 times a day, if not 10 times a day. And so I viewed that as a way of doing 2 things. Number 1, of getting me up to speed, but number 2, and more importantly than that, me being kind of the transmission point, from everything that Maria knew to Jackie. So one of the things that I've been working with the team on is we are going to be providing, I think hopefully tomorrow, if not by Thursday, Jackie with a very extensive transition memo. And obviously it's not going to answer every single question, but the idea with this memo is, in my part, I basically described all the nuts and bolts of the different meetings, the different processes, the role of the director at council meetings, the presentation on a monthly basis of financials, the meetings that they typically have with staff. And then we also did a memo for each division, basically explaining, where the files are kept, who the contact points are, external and internal contacts, major projects. So all of that information is being written down and passed on to Jackie. I also, one of the things I mentioned to Jackie tonight when I met with her just before this meeting, is she and I will be spending a lot of time together her first week, and basically figuring out what are some of the things that she would like me to kind of continue to do for a few weeks, and what are some of the things that she would like to do kind of from the beginning. I do know that the budget process is one of the things that she really wants to get into very quickly. Again, I've been talking to Jenny about some of the things Jackie has shared with me and that she's interested in getting involved in. I've also asked staff for the first week or two to basically send any questions to both Jackie and I, which is what Maria did with me, as a way of making sure that there isn't kind of a lost connection. As you all know, there's a lot of systems that we use in the city, and so that's, I think, one of the biggest parts of the onboarding is making sure that, you know, she's aware, for example, of the system where she would approve, you know, purchase orders, the system where she would approve purchasing cards, the system where she would be able to view budget information. And so I do believe that the transition probably will be a month or two. And I'm definitely going to be available for her during that time. We're still kind of scoping what that will look like, but initially it will be me passing on quite a bit of information, me meeting with her as often as she wants, and kind of transitioning so that I'm, you know, kind of maybe helping coordinate some aspects and then transitioning to her over time. We have a supplemental budget that will be going to council on Monday, so I'll be the point person on that, and then we'll go from there. But I've been keeping her up to date on everything that's happening.
Thank you so much. We look forward to meeting her. Any other questions?
So I'm pretty sure that I can still count the number of finance directors I've worked with during my time on BAC on one hand, but this is definitely the last one. So,
well, my time as interim was so short. Please don't include me in that.
no, these are all
keep it in one hand. Right? Keep it in one hand.
When it comes to my experience with turnover, this is not something that stands out in my mind. So I guess it hasn't left the same impression with me as it has with Steve.
Well, thank you so much for giving us such a thorough readout, and if there's anything this committee can do to be helpful in that transition, we would love to know that, but look forward to meeting her and talking about how we can work together.
Great, thank you. And I know she's very excited about this committee. She's asked a few questions about it, and I know when she starts with the city next week, I'm sure she'll want to meet with Jenny about it, and I'm sure she'll be an active participant and really looks forward to meeting all of you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Great. I'll move forward in our agenda. Dun, dun, dun. To the reserve issue brief. There's been some traffic in the document over the last few days, which has been wonderful. And we are getting very close to the finish line on this. I will echo previous statements in the meeting, Steve. Just thank you so much. You've invested so much time and clear thought and many years worth of experience that I do not have into this document, which is really, really helpful. I think there's a few things that we have to iron out tonight. Jenny, can you remind us, when do we have to have this submitted? The timeline, because we're having this conversation next month.
Right. Well, are we going to, and that's a question I have for Councilmember Russell and Mayor Pro Tem Sierra. Do we know if a meeting has been scheduled? And if not, I can check on that.
I do not know if it's on the agenda, and unfortunately, Mayor Pro Tem is not here because it may have been scheduled. The mayor and the Mayor Pro Tem do the agenda setting, so it is possible that it has been scheduled, but I do not know when it is.
Okay, let me also double check on that, Chelsea, and then I'll send out an email. Depending on when it's scheduled, if it's the first part of February or the latter, if it's the first part of February, we may have missed that deadline. So I have a feeling we can probably get it scheduled for the latter part of February.
Okay.
So, but we typically would like the material to city council no later than that Thursday, or actually Wednesday before the meeting.
Okay.
Just so that we
I
can
think-
get it into the packet and city council has time to review it before the meeting.
Yes, absolutely. Well, especially if we're looking at a late February meeting, I think we should be totally
Yes.
fine. I think
Yes.
We're almost there.
And
So
and if I can sway whoever puts the agenda together, I might ask for that last Monday in February, if that's okay with you guys.
That works for me. Any other thoughts?
So, I'm even okay punting to March on this. My strong preference is to have a product that we all agree on and that will be of value to council and the rest of the community. And if that takes us a little while longer to get done, that's fine by me.
I feel like we have a product that we do almost all agree on. I think we're 99.9% there. And I mean, it's hard to say without Joel on the phone, but if it were to be submitted as is right now, I know I'd be content.
I think we're very close, and I agree with your sentiment, Steve, of like wanting to make sure it's right. I also seem to recall there being a comment from the mayor pro tem that they needed to make some decisions based on this document maybe as early as March, and so maybe we needed to kind of have this conversation in February. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I feel like there was a little bit of a need to get this done if we can, and I think we're really close.
Yeah. I remember hearing that sooner is better than later.
Yeah. That being said, since I know Dan does feel pretty good with the current state, I have a few notes. Does it make sense for me to kind of just kick off?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So one thing is I saw we added some formatting, we added a title, some stuff like that to the document. The only thing I think is just important is I think that it should say that it's written by Steve Ward on behalf of the Budget Advisory. I think it's really, this is your work product, and I think obviously we're all contributing, we're all offering our 2 cents, but I think it's completely appropriate for it to say that you wrote this and that it's on behalf of the committee. So that would be a recommendation that I have. I agree with the exclusion of the 3% Tabor reserve. That makes total sense to me. I know that we're waiting on a few calculations, but kind of the only flags I had were, and I think these are some of the things that Joel mentioned as well, is just really hitting the right tone with the document. And I know that this is, you've said this before, so you're coming at it with a very specific tone, but I think some of Joel's edits about maybe moving some language around, cutting some of the language that might seem a little too rudimentary, and then maybe, as we all know, involuntary seizure might be strong, which I understand what you're trying to communicate, but I think actually if we just, and I put a suggested edit in the document, if we just say that revenue is taxes, it implies that's not an option for citizens to contribute. So that's a recommendation I have on that. 2 things on the ratchet, and then I'm going to get to the long-term asset reserve, which is the biggie. I noticed that for us, for Inglewood, we're recommending a 16.7% of revenue is our number, and the Littleton model is actually 8 to 18% of expenditures of the general fund. And I'm just curious your thoughts, Steve, of calculating it on revenue versus expenditure, and why are we making that decision?
I'm agnostic on that. The one thing I'll say is that expenditures are vastly more predictable and controllable than revenues. So I think I chose revenue because that's the most sensitive item. If you don't have revenue coming in, it's pretty tough to do business. So that's the element that I wanted to see covered. I think that's why I did. But yeah, it's not they tend to run similarly with each other, and I'm fine either way.
I don't have enough of a background in budget policy to have a strong recommendation here, but I think, or to know the best practice. But I would say maybe consistency with what the city's already doing would be helpful of how we're calculating that. I'm not sure if anyone has any input on that.
Can I ask a question? So Steve, is it in line with the policy that we already have? And in 2015, 2016, when I first got on council, we hired somebody to come up with best practices on all of those policies. And so it was probably in 2016 where council set that. That's why it's there.
Yeah, I think I put the date in the report. That 2016 sounds right to me. Now that my memory is jogged a little bit, revenue was the term that's used by the Municipal Finance Professionals League or in their memo, and that is also what was used in the financial policies, and that's why I stuck with revenue.
Makes sense to me. I just noticed the difference and I wanted to make sure we were aligned. Something else that I noticed is, when we're towards the end of the report, when you're talking about the 10% going into anything above the 10% that would go into the reserve would immediately be, I think the term is like swept into capital improvements. And I'm just wondering, should we add that recommendation, or is that, should we be agnostic about where anything above the 10% goes? I know last meeting, Mayor Pro Tem brought up this concern about, should that money be saved for bigger projects over time versus having to be spent each year? Is that recommendation something that's necessary in this brief, or should it just be, you put the 10% into the reserve and then we don't offer a suggestion on what we do beyond that?
So I think that is an important recommendation for a couple of reasons. First of all, you can't budget that extra money on ongoing expenses because you don't know how much is going to come in year to year. Secondly, part of the spirit of this memo is to capture the idea that by creating a ballooning savings account, we are sacrificing something, and that is in large part the capital needs of the city. So by sweeping that money into capital, we can avoid that conflict between a large budget surplus and deferred capital expenses.
And if it's in the capital improvement fund, can it be held for year-over-year projects?
Yes, it can, for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that Inglewood has been debruced for like 20 years now. So we can hold money year to year without having to refund it.
Right, and it is specific budget category. Okay, I just had a question about that. And then more, we know that the basement of the reserve is the 16.7 or the 2 months or whatever, but is there a ceiling? I know there was conversation, I was trying to find it, of like, is there 4 months, or I think it brought up a year last meeting by the Mayor Pro Tem. Do we want to add a ceiling or a cap?
Personally, I think the ceiling is captured by pushing less and less money into that fund as it grows. So I would not recommend an absolute ceiling. That's just how I feel about the matter, though. I'll say also, I think at the point that you have a year's worth of revenue in reserve, you have some other management problems, I'll say, in that there's almost certainly a number of things that are not getting done because you have that amount of cash in the bank.
Certainly. I just wasn't sure if maybe we want to add a line showing the intentionality of not putting a cap, or so it doesn't look like it's a missing element. You know what I mean? Because as I was reading it, I was like, where does it end? Does it ever end? I just wonder if maybe highlighting the intentionality of that choice might be useful.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, the biggie. So I have not been on this committee as long as you guys. I've saw that there was some 2015 recommendations. There's a lot of content here. And I know last meeting, Suzanne recommended maybe a slow retiring process. I'm not sure I can get on board with it as it is now in the report. Not because I couldn't be persuaded, but because I'm just not sure if we need that piece of it to make the rest of the recommendation function. And I think the rest of the recommendation for me seems like good sense. This piece feels perhaps unnecessary and maybe deserving of its own piece, which I know you've done before, Steve. But I'm wondering if the last time we recommended this was 5 years ago or 6 years ago, is it worth holding that section and maybe again coming up with some sort of slow spend strategy to put into our report this summer and to not put here? I know Joel also had some questions about it, and I'm just wondering if it complicates the elegance of the ratchet slide, which I think is your strongest recommendation.
So I'm not married to this recommendation, but I did come to it for a reason. And I covered this a little bit in the last session. I have on occasion referred to the long-term asset reserve derisively as council's piggy bank. And I still feel that way about it. I think, and I tried to get to this in the report, and I might not have captured it as well as perhaps I could have. The long-term asset reserve causes confusion over how much money the city actually has in quote-unquote reserve or the unallocated fund balance. It hides well, maybe hides is not the right word, but shadows a sizable portion, about $5 million right now, of the reserve. And I don't think that it is serving the purpose that it was originally intended to serve. Councils have traditionally been hesitant to spend this money, even when an opportunity has arisen. And the idea of investing in capital for multi-generational benefit is good, in my opinion. I understand the spirit with which the long-term asset reserve was constructed. I don't know that it is satisfying that spirit now. And it seems to me like a sizable lump of cash that's sitting there causing confusion about when it can be spent, how it can be spent, whether or not it can be spent, and also causing confusion over just how much money the city actually has in reserve. And I still believe that the city would be better served by ending the long-term asset reserve. That's not a hill I'm going to die on. And so if the committee is not of one voice on that particular topic, I'm okay with scrapping that. But it is there for a reason. And I think it goes with the overarching philosophy that we have to use the people's money intentionally. And I don't believe that the long-term asset reserve and the way it has been used, at least during the time I've been on this committee, is intentional. So that's where I'm at on that.
Dan, your thoughts?
My thoughts are the council that we have serving us today is not the same council that we had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 13 years ago. If I were on council today, I would feel a little resentful if I were told previous councils didn't use this money, so you're going to lose it. I would respond more favorably to figure out a way to use it or lose it.
Yeah, I think the recommendation, and correct me if I'm wrong, was to sweep it into the regular reserve and just eliminate that as an account, and then set the reserve cap accordingly. Did I say send it to capital funds? I might have said that too.
I think you want to sweep it so that we can start at the 3-month mark and then continue with the 2 months.
Okay. Yeah.
Ben?
And so I don't agree with the notion that they're losing it. I wouldn't put it that way. I don't think that it has a purpose to label this money differently than any other money. It all belongs to the citizens. It should all be used for the public benefit. And that money has been sitting there for years and years and years and is not getting used for the public benefit. That's my problem.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with you on that. I think it's just how we're going to communicate that to council. But and again, I made that recommendation, but as it's written today, if we moved forward with that, I'd be I'd be content.
I think for me is, Steve, I don't disagree with you. I may agree with you. I just can't say for certain at this juncture. I just would need way more information about what's the status of the fund, the amount, where have there been withdrawals, is there a plan? Like, you know, there's just, I have more questions before I could put my name on something that says like, absolutely, this is what I think we should do with it, you know? But with maybe some time and some of that data, maybe even proposing, maybe not a full get rid of the account and sweep it, but a request for a long-term plan of what we do with the money. How can it be spent multi-generationally? Open to having all those conversations. Like I said, I just don't know if I'm ready to, at this point, as part of this plan, say I'm ready to make that decision.
Then maybe we should scrap it and put it in the annual report.
Will that kill your soul?
Not as much as written by Stephen Ward with under the consent of the other committee members would.
Endorsement.
But yeah, okay. So two things. That fund currently grows with rents from McClellan Reservoir. That's why it keeps getting bigger. And the most recent expenditure from that fund wasn't actually an expenditure, it was a loan. They swept $2 million into the stormwater fund as a loan. So it did get leveraged, but it didn't get spent. It may look like it's being spent, but it's not being spent. It's a loan. So that money's coming back. Yeah, other previous uses fall along the similar lines from what I understand. Anytime there's a monetary need, there's not a specific place it can be drawn from, oftentimes later is tapped with the idea that it would be subsequently filled. That's my understanding of it. Jenny could probably elaborate a little more, but that's where I get it. Yeah, I'll have to think about complete removal. It sounds like I might be outvoted, so I might lose on this anyway. But yeah, I think it serves a purpose there, especially given the overarching message, which is, in my opinion, there's too much money in the bank, and that shows the opposite of what's trying to be demonstrated by growing the fund. On that note, though, maybe, yeah, I don't know that I can draw a conclusion right now on removing that, but I'll take it under advisement.
If we need to finalize this document, though, on a timely basis, I would like to get Joel's opinion, especially if we do end up needing to vote, because I do see that he had some questions in the document. And so would that maybe be the right next step, is to get Joel's thoughts? I'm just wondering, what's the path forward if we're not ready to make a decision now, but we do need to decide before our next meeting?
So two things. If you want to grab coffee and talk a little more about later, I'm available, so we can do that. And I would have to look at the content on the document. I haven't seen Joel's most recent edits yet, but I may have some responses on there. As far as the path going forward, I think we could make a decision on this within the week, probably. I just not really fully prepared to do it tonight.
Yeah, it looks like he just had some questions about where the money goes and kind of what questions about the fulfillment of the purpose of the reserve, and some kind of big picture questions, which are many of the ones that I have as well. Again, just not having the same experience on this committee. And for me, it's not a it's not a no, it's maybe a not yet. That's the one piece that I just feel like I would need maybe more conversations with city staff, more understanding of the history, more understanding of some of the intent there. Because it is it's a different piece of it than this, everything else, which seems a little bit more straightforward to me. Are we able, and would we want, so feel free to say no, but would we want to do another like small working session just to finalize this like next week after everyone's had a chance when we don't have a guest, and just knock it out? Do we have time for that?
I can do that. It always pains me a little bit when we need to request more of Jenny's time.
Not a problem. Just let me know.
And yeah, I don't think I have any conflicts either.
I'm just thinking, oh, please.
Can I just ask a question, because I don't know the answer to this question? And is there a policy around the ladder fund? I mean, that came into being before I got on council. I think it was the council previous to when I got on that. And I know it came up because they sold property and they wanted to use it for something else. But was it ever put in writing what the use of that fund could be? Do you know that?
I believe there was a resolution passed, but that's the extent of the policy. That's one of the reasons why I refer to it as council's piggy bank, because there's nothing binding on that money. So essentially it's a slush fund that council could use however they want, whenever they want.
So if there is a suggestion in how to use it, is it possible that perhaps just getting council to make a firm policy for that fund rather than just let it sit there would perhaps even take care of that? Or, I mean, I see the problem with just leaving it sit there.
Unfortunately, that doesn't eliminate confusion over what the bottom line is. So right now, when we examine reserves, we have four things. We have the unallocated fund balance, we have the Tabor reserve, we have later, and then, well, maybe we only have those three, but the way they kind of fit together causes confusion. So when people are trying to look for the bottom line, they say, is it this? Is it this? Is this it? I don't know. How much money does the city have? And the answer is the city has later plus the unassigned fund balance minus the Tabor reserve at any given time to use to any purpose. And so I think later causes confusion, as I've said earlier, partially by creating the illusion that the city has less money available than it actually does.
Okay.
Is there a way we could fix that problem? So I think that's an important problem that you're identifying, Steve. In the report, without having to have another meeting, could we simply say that the unrestricted fund balance is the true reserve or the true, bottom line, and that, because you do recommend, and I agree with you, that it should exclude the 3% for Tabor because we couldn't spend it anyway. And then could we also just recommend that it would also exclude the later fund? And then say like, we recommend there be a policy and we'll bring recommendations in our annual report later this year, but then to really identify that this reserve policy should be limited to just this. Like right now, the recommendation is to sweep later into it, but maybe just say like, we believe both of these should be excluded from this calculation and offer that clarification.
I'd say you're getting warmer. One of the ongoing issues still is that later is growing. We're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars in leases from McClellan on an annual basis. And if we were to take that money as revenue, as opposed to just taking it as, it goes into this, fund, then, perhaps we could have our two public works traffic engineers. So that's an example of a sacrifice that gets made as later grows, and nobody really knows what to do with that money.
And just a point of clarification, I believe within the last couple of years, council has recommended that the the EMER rents are going to general fund operations. So therefore, later it has not been growing for the last couple of years.
Thank you for that correction, Jenny.
That's okay.
Slightly embarrassing correction. I hate it.
No, no. I just, I'm going through the numbers in my head. I'm going, wait a minute, later hasn't increased.
Well, surprise.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think this is ripe for something to address in our report, either to ask council to come up with an actual policy, or maybe to recommend in the summer that it be swept in, you know, but I would need a lot, like I said, a lot more information. But I wonder if just saying that, like, it should not be part of the reserve calculation in this report as it pertains to reserve policy is where we can find consensus as a committee.
You've won me over.
That's not an easy thing to do. I take that very I'll take the win. Yeah, and then also, Jenny, if there is any, are there any memos or information on later that exist currently if we want to pursue this topic?
Other than the issue briefs, and I think there might have been a council request regarding later. Did I provide you guys with that council request on later? If not, I can.
Don't have a recollection of that. If you wouldn't mind recirculating it, that could be helpful for us.
Okay, I will do that.
Because it sounds like we might need to be doing some research and brushing up on this topic. Okay, some of the other notes in the document that Joel left, some of the edits, were just some consistency around language and definitions, which I agree with would be helpful. And making sure that I think we need one more calculation on the back end. So I don't think we need another meeting now. But Steve, if you want to kind of make any edits or ask any questions of Joel to clarify any of his comments, and then make the tweaks that we just discussed about excluding later, and then also I would love to add your authorship. Then I think we can be done with this. Do we want to say by next Tuesday? By the 2nd? Is that too quick?
Yes, no, it's not too quick. I will look at this tomorrow. And one final note on authorship. I have a lengthy history of activism in this city, and I believe wholeheartedly that this document has much less power if it's listed as authored specifically by me, as opposed to a document that's authored by the committee as a whole. There's a significant difference between this is Steve Ward's idea that he brought to the Budget Advisory Committee and convinced them to agree to, and this is the Budget Advisory Committee's idea that they want council to adopt.
I will leave that completely to your judgment. Appreciate the thought. And yeah, I'm happy to have it be from the committee. That's what you prefer.
Yeah. And if I can offer a suggestion, Steve, I mean, you and Chelsea have had the opportunity to share some dialogue back and forth, and I've listened, because I think you all know where I stand, but maybe you and Joel can connect one-on-one in the next week. I think that'll make next Tuesday's meeting more effective, but that is a gentle suggestion.
Chelsea, were you saying that you don't want to meet on Tuesday, or we do meet on Tuesday?
I'm not sure if we need to have another meeting, and as was noted, more of Jenny's time, if we could resolve Joel's comments via email. Am I missing that?
No, I think I could probably have a pretty good conversation with him on this and maybe clarify some of those things. I'm not sure that I fully understand all of his comments, but I'll take a look tomorrow and see.
If you work through any of the comments, and then I think the three of us are aligned around the big issues that I had, and then just circulate the final draft to us just to make sure we all can give it one more read if there are any changes. before it goes to Jenny to go to council. I think that would be best practice. But if we could have it be the final by next week, I think.
Yeah, that's
on
not.
track.
We'll get that done.
And just a point of clarification, if you guys do need to have a quick meeting on Tuesday, just let me know and then I can send out an invite. And we could probably hash any last minute notes or adjustments or changes within a half an hour or so. And that's no problem.
Okay. We will try not to, but we will let you
Okay.
know.
Just let me know.
Wonderful. Okay, I feel like that was really helpful. Are we ready to move on to member's choice? We good for that? All right. Member's choice. I will kick us off just because Jenny sent a very helpful email that we need to build out the rest of our work plan for the year. We had things scheduled through this meeting for our department presentations. And remind me, again, this is my first year doing this. We did our report, we have to submit it in July. Is that correct? So do we start working on it, like start talking about it in April, the April meeting? I think. So
one of the challenges we've had in the past is that the report arrives too late for council to consider. So, this is one of the reasons why this issue brief is coming out now, is because the discussions are beginning, in the next month or two, where some decisions will certainly be made or prepared for the 2022 cycle. Jenny could probably elaborate a little more on the proposed. But the budget adoption hearing is usually September, sometimes October. And our committee report has traditionally come out around that time, but again, has been often too late to be useful for that particular cycle.
And I know we expedited it last year to try to address part of this, which is why we submitted in the summer. I want to say it was July, wasn't it? And then we presented in August. Seems like a long time ago already. All that to say is I think we had at least one meeting before set up as like a working meeting, which I thought was really helpful to try to work through some of those details. But we probably, I would say, could still have departmental presentations for February, March, and April at least. And then maybe May, and then a working meeting in June. Jenny, can you remind me what we did last year? Does that sound right?
I'm thinking so. I think we wanted to have the report in council's hands. I think before the end of July, so that they could take that into consideration when departments are meeting with the first part of August, the operation budget. So I think if we can get that into their hands and you all present it to them by the end of July, that would be great.
Great. So let me see if you guys think this sounds good. We could have a working meeting for our June meeting, which is where we could do the bulk of the work. We'll obviously be talking about it leading up to then, so that it can be submitted in July. And then we could plan out presentations from February to May. Is there agreement around that schedule?
That's fine by me. One note, I believe my term expires in June. So officially, I will not be a member in July unless I'm mistaken. That doesn't affect the outcome on the report, in my opinion. I'm still willing to put in the work and potentially have my name on it, but as an emeritus member. I always wanted to use that term.
Okay. Well, I am fine with Jenny just kind of working through the list for our next presentations, unless anyone has any specific requests for who they'd like to go next.
We haven't heard from utilities, IT, human resources, finance, and municipal court.
Oh, that's one other thing. Jenny, remember we talked about you doing the finance presentation for the committee when our new member joined?
Yes, we'll do that in February.
Okay. So that will be no department presentation for February then?
We could have one, but it all depends on, how long they go.
What do we think about maybe not having a presentation in February so that we could meet the new finance director, welcome our new member, Jenny could give an overview. I feel like that's a lot of information for one meeting.
Perfect. I like that idea.
Because I'd like to have some time for some welcome remarks for the new finance director and also for our new member more formally.
Jenny, can you read through that list one more time? I got IT, courts, HR.
Utilities.
And finance.
Utilities, IT, finance, HR, and municipal court.
Do we need to hear from, say, HR, for example?
It's up to you.
I don't think we need to hear from all of these departments.
Okay.
I think finance too. I mean, we'll have a brand new director. I don't know if they'll be in a place to give a readout. I think we can take that one off the list.
I think next month is the finance meeting.
Right. Does that just leave us with municipal courts, utilities, and IT?
So I'll say on this list, utilities is the one I'm most interested in hearing from and the one that I think is most compelling right now. I think HR is important. And the reason why I think HR is important is because they negotiate the city's benefits plan, and a sizable percentage of the city's expenses are human resources related. So the HR director can talk about some of the push from things like the union contract, the benefits expenses, some of the risks that the city experiences financially relative to those costs that increase regardless of the state of the economy. So those are the two big ones for me. I don't think we've ever had the courts in during my time, and that's probably an oversight on our part. And IT has a lot of big projects, but I think a lot of their stuff is going to be capital related, which is technically outside of our jurisdiction. So that's my thought on that rundown.
I'm hearing utilities, HR, municipal courts. That sound good to you, Suzanne?
Yes.
All right.
So that will be for March, April, and May?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
And if the utilities director is available for that March meeting, that would be when I would put him in, but.
I will ask.
Okay, and yeah, Jenny, anything that you can give next month? I believe there was a presentation that I don't think I've ever even seen on just city like budgeting and planning best practices. That kind of information I think would be really helpful. And then anything maybe you could also give on the cycle of the budget for the city and budget creation would be great.
Perfect.
Maria did that for us a couple years ago.
We'll dust it off.
I need the refresher, trust me. Okay, anything else for Members' Choice?
Not for me.
I just wanted to ask, I apologize, I have not been up to date on my council meetings, but do we have any update on the alternate member request? Maybe from Councilmember Russell submitted that letter.
The alternate member for you all, I think Mayor Pro Tem brought that forward, but I'm not sure we have a response to that. So I'll make a note to make sure.
And I'll also double check on our end just to see if they've at least met to discuss that topic.
I don't think that council has discussed the topic, but the request may be out there.
Oh, okay.
So
I just have one thing. I was checking my notes and I noticed that in my notes, written in all caps, grant writer. So I'd like to plant that seed for future meetings. I think similar to centralized GIS and mapping, a centralized grant writer would probably pay for that job 5, 10, 15, 25 times over. We have some gifted grant writers that work for the city now, but centralizing that function would be, I think, potentially of great use, even if it was just a commissioned job.
Flagged for me as well. Okay, Jenny, just let us know. We will get you information next week on this brief, but let us know next steps for the submission and the meeting and what that's all going to look like.
And Chelsea, I'll draft a memo from you to Mayor Pro Tem Sierra and Councilmember Russell so that they can also ask council to get that onto an agenda item, because I think that's our new step in our boards and commissions handbook.
Because I know this is also a request from the city manager, so I wasn't sure what that was.
We'll make sure all bases are covered. We'll get everybody in the loop, and we'll eventually become experts in this new process.
Keeping me in line, Jenny. Thank you.
We'll keep each other in line.
Well, thank you everyone for hanging in for a very long meeting. I really appreciate it. And I think we got some good stuff accomplished. So with that, we can adjourn.
Thank you all. Have a great
Thank you,
evening.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chelsea, for keeping us on track.
Yep.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Josh. We'll see you next month.
Thank you, Josh.
Looking forward to it. Thanks all. Bye.
Bye-bye.